It's actually an amazing thing. When you learn something on a simple level, it has a completely different meaning to when you learn it on a deep level, on a more Kabbalistic level. Let me give you an example. There's 613 laws in the Torah. One of the 613 laws is as follows: that if God forbid somebody got capital punishment, after they executed him, they would take the corpse and hang it on a tree for a few minutes. And we find that in the Torah. It's one of the 613 laws. Let me give you the wording. If there'll be a person, chet mishpat movis, that person did a sin that carried with it the death penalty. And the court of Jewish law tried him and they found him guilty for humus and they killed him. Says the Torah, but talisa oisa, hang him on the tree. The talisa oisa, hang him, ala eitz, hang him on the tree. Very heavy law. Now in the 16th century, there was a very famous Kabbalist, a Kabbalist by the name of the Ramak, Reb Moshe Karadava, who passed away in the month of Tammuz in the 16th century. His student, who became the most famous Kabbalist of the last millennium, the Arizal, he did the funeral. Now he's the most famous Kabbalist, and Rabbi Dubov is certainly a student of his teachings. The Arizal did the funeral, and when it came to the eulogy, the Arizal based his eulogy on this Torah sentence. And how did he read it? How can that be? Because you see in the Torah there's no vowels, and therefore you can read things slightly differently. And also the Hebrew word chet can either mean sin or lacking. The Hebrew word osa, can either mean it or him. So he read it like this: if there'll be a person. Chet, this is his eulogy. This is the Arizal's eulogy for the famous angelic man, Moshe Karadava. He said as follows: if there'll be a person, chet mishpat movis, lacking the whole reason to die, not sinning and therefore having to die, but chet mishpat movis, lacking the whole reason to die. Why did he lack the whole reason to die? Because he was a perfect tzaddik. He never ever sinned. He never had evil within him. But for humus, we look at him and we see he's not breathing. He's dead. Said the Arizal, the talisa oisa, not hang him, but hang it, blame it, pin this death, ala eitz, on the tree. Not the tree outside the court of Jewish law, the tree of knowledge that's mentioned in the Torah that Adam and Eve ate from. And because they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, man has to die. Now, why do I say this? Because Rabbi Dubov is an expert in Kabbalah. And the next series of shiurim, of classes, is Kabbalah on the Torah portion of the week. Rabbi Dubov is an author of many books of Kabbalah. There's a book on resurrection, how it's going to be when Mashiach comes. There's another book called The Chain Order of Creation. Rabbi Dubov, it's certainly an honor to hear him and to have him share his wisdom with us. I want to share with you all that Rabbi Dubov also has a course that's going to be close to the first 20 or 30 people who come to it. But it's certainly anybody who's really interested in the study of Kabbalah. Please, I'm going to send everybody an email with information and subscribe to the course. But in the meantime, enjoy Kabbalah on the Torah portion. Let the Torah portion become alive with mystical teaching. Rabbi Dubov.
Thank you, Rabbi Mesinza, for that beautiful introduction and that beautiful eulogy which the Arizal said for the Ramak. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to Kabbalah on the Parsha, the Kabbalah of the Red Heifer. You know, there are three types of mitzvot. There are what we call chukim, edus, and mishpatim. Chukim are statutes. These are laws that just don't have a reason to them. There are edus, there are testimonies, for example, like Shabbos. They bear witness that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. And then you have mishpatim, civil laws, which even if the Torah would not have been given, nevertheless, most probably, we would have kept many of them. And so the question is a very simple question. Either all the laws of the Torah should be rational, we should understand them, or you could argue the other way around, that if the idea is obedience, then it doesn't make any difference if they have any reason or rationale at all. The truth is, this is a long debated question. Some say it's actually the question of the wise son in the Haggadah, because he knows what the Edus and Chukim and Mishpatim, so what is he asking? Some say that he's actually asking this question. And in truth, Our sages say, Ani nivresi l'shamash eskoini. I am created to serve my master. And when I say I, it includes everything within me. And within the human being, you have powers of tainug, of pleasure, of rotzon, of willpower, desire. You have powers of intellect. You have emotions. You have intellect, emotions, which express themselves in thought, speech, and action. And the truth is, the reason why there are certain mitzvahs which have reason and certain mitzvahs which don't have any reason is because what God wants is that we should serve him in our entirety. And therefore, there are mitzvahs that apply to our pleasure, mitzvahs that apply to our willpower, to our minds, to our emotions, to our thoughts, speech, and action. And also in the mind to that which goes above the mind, that transcends the mind in forms of obedience. And so we have certain mitzvahs which make sense and certain mitzvahs which don't make sense. And that makes sense because God wants a wholesome service. But there's one mitzvah which is called the chukah, the statute of the entire Torah. Zois chukas HaTorah. This is the mitzvah which we read about in this week's parsha, the mitzvah of the Parah Aduma, the red heifer. And nobody could understand it. If you read the details of the offering of the red heifer, how it's brought, what the effects are, it's amazing, but it doesn't make any sense to us. How a person who has been defiled by coming into contact with a corpse becomes purified by having a drop of this water which has the ashes of the red heifer placed into it, it defies all understanding. And it's called the chukah, if you want, of the entire Torah. Join me on an evening trail this evening where we're going to have a look at the Torah, not from its simple perspective, but from an esoteric perspective, from the lenses of Pnimius HaTorah, of the inner dimension of the Torah. And as what I'm going to share with you this evening is actually taken from a book called Likutei Torah, which was written by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, one of the greatest mystics and the founder of the Chabad movement. Let's start this evening by going all the way to Yechezkel, to the chariot of Ezekiel, that extremely cryptic description of how Yechezkel sees the supernal chariot. One thing we have to understand, all prophets received their prophecy whilst they were asleep in the form of a vision. It was only Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, who received his prophecy face to face from God. And also when you are climbing from this corporeal world into the metaphysical world, and upon your return, how are you to describe what you saw to people of this world unless you use reference of this world? And consequently, we find that all the prophets, even though sometimes what they were describing were the higher worlds of Yetzirah or Bria, as we've explained in the previous introductory classes, nevertheless, they had to describe it in a way in which we mere mortals would appreciate it. And so consequently, Yechezkel speaks about the Merkava, the chariot, as having a Pnei Shor, the face of an ox, a Pnei Arya, the face of a lion, an eagle. And there's one sentence in there which says, V'hachayos rotzoi v'shoiv kemare habozot. Now, Chayos HaKodesh are a group of angels. We mention them every day in our prayers. Just before the reading of the Shema, we speak about the angels called Seraphim, Oifanim, and Chayos HaKodesh. These are three different categories of angels in different realms. But these Chayos HaKodesh, Yechezkel describes them as rotzoi v'shoiv, toing and froming, kemare habozok, like the appearance of a flesh. Today's presentation is going to explain that Zois Chukas HaTorah, the whole idea of the Torah Aduma, is to capture the dynamic of rotzoi v'shoiv, of toing and froming. That's our destination. Join me on the journey. The truth is, we always feel this double dynamic. The idea of being and desiring to be netherworldly, to step out of the creation, to get out of this place, but then yet to return back to it. We've spoken about, in our previous classes, the ladder of prayer, the panoramic view from above. Or, for example, Shabbos, a step out of creation into the Creator, in order to have fresh, new perspective when we re-enter the 6 days of the week after Shabbos. It's a different week. It's been energized by spending 24 hours in the island of serenity, steeped and immersed in our prayer, our family, our Torah learning, and our inner tranquility and peace. When you go out from that Shabbos into the weekdays, it's a different weekday. So we actually are familiar with this toing and froming. Zois Chukas HaTorah, explains the Alter Rebbe, if you want to understand what the inner working of the entire Torah is, look at the mitzvah of Parah Aduma, of the red heifer, and you will see exemplified in it the rotzoi and the shoiv, the toing and the froming. How so? Now we're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic. We know that the infrastructure of the higher realms is arrayed in the human being. Mibasari echze Eloka, says Job, from my flesh I perceive God. Now, God doesn't have any body or corporeality whatsoever. So what perception is Job talking about? The answer is, if you want to perceive how God creates the worlds, the chain order of creation, what is the infrastructure of the supernal realms, you don't need to look far. Look at the human being, because the human being is created in the image of God. In the human being, you have right, left, and center, what we call in Kabbalah kavim, lines. Now, the basic building block of all the worlds are the Sephirot. We have explained what these are in the introductory classes. In short, they are media through which God communicates and deals with the world. They are arrayed in human body. Let's just have a look at two of the Sifra today, the right hand being the Sephira of Chesed, of kindness, of revelation, and the left hand being Gevura, severity, restraint. So you have Yemin and Smol. If you have a look in the Merkava, in the chariot of Yechezkel, Pnei Shor, the face of the ox, was on the left. What does that mean? And why are we talking here about a red heifer? Furthermore, the red heifer is completely burnt, reduced to ashes, and in that burning process, there is thrown into the fire a cedar wood, a hyssop, and a crimson thread, an erez, an azov, and a shnisolas. What do they represent? Why did they need to go in as well? And then the ashes is mixed with mayim chayim, living waters. It can't be any water, but it has to be living water that comes from a spring. And only when the two are mixed, when that potion is sprinkled on a person who has become defiled by contact with a corpse, do they become purified? What does all that mean? Yamin, right hand, is revelation. Where you have revelation, what we call gilui, you have godliness. There is no room for the other side. The side of unholiness in the Zohar is called the Sitra Achra, the other side. It's the unholy side. God created in this world opposites, a side of holiness and a side of unholiness, a side of Kedusha and a side of Klipa. Klipa meaning a peel, because the side of unholiness is compared to a peel. It is there to protect the fruit, but when you want to eat the fruit, you discard the peel. On the one hand, the Klipa, the peel, is there. Evil is there, so that there should be free choice, because in order to have reward and punishment, and in order to have avodah that a person should achieve by the work of their hands and heart, there needs to be challenge, an arena of challenge. The person has to choose life and good over death and evil. And when a person does that, they can be rewarded. So there needs to be the existence of evil in the world. The genesis of evil in the world is a fascinating topic in Kabbalah called Shaviras HaKelim, which perhaps we'll touch on a little later. But the point is over here is that the right hand represents revelation. Where you have full revelation, there is no place for the other side. On the other hand, where you have restraint, withholding, then it's possible that there be what's called in Kabbalah a yenika lichitzonim. Yenika means nourishment given to chitzonim, outer, external forces. Pinim in Hebrew is the inner, which is why the face is called the panim, and chutz is outside, and hence chitzonim are external forces, forces of evil, forces of unholiness. The nourishment of those forces of unholiness stems from the left, from the power of restraint, the withholding of revelation. The Pnei Shor the face of the ox in the chariot of Yechezkel was on the left. The red heifer, every item in this physical world, has its spiritual counterpart in the higher worlds. So the Talmud expresses that by saying, there is no blade of grass that doesn't have a muzzle striking it and telling it to grow. That means, it's a Talmudic way of saying that every physical item has its spiritual source from where it came from. Because in the chain order of creation, in the Seder Hishtalshalut, everything in this world stems from an item in the higher worlds. And in fact, the Maggid of Mezrich says that it's a two-way process. You can create matters in the higher worlds by your actions in this world. Da mala maila, you should know what is above. Mimach comes from you and stems from you. So let's go back to our face of the ox in the chariot of Yechezkel. The red heifer comes and stems from that face of the ox. It's red. Red symbolizes gevura. Colors symbolize different characteristics. Red symbolizes gevura, strength, severity. And therefore, the red heifer, which has never had a yoke on it, and the idea is that it's never accepted the yoke of heaven, that red heifer needs to be slaughtered and burnt. What is the idea of the burning of the red heifer? In general, when we talk about korbanot, offerings, sacrifice, we always reflect that within our animal soul. So when we read in the Siddur every single morning about the various sacrifices, we are engaging in the Torah concept of those sacrifices, but we're not just reading something which happened millennia ago. What we are doing is reenacting that in a spiritual dimension in ourselves. So we all have an animal soul. That needs to be brought on the altar of the heart, where you have fiery passion to God. That requires kindling, and during prayer, the passion through our meditation rises and consumes the fats, the excess, the meats of the animal soul so that it is consumed. The one offering that in fact was not brought on the altar, but in fact was brought outside, and it was completely burnt, was the red heifer. The idea is as follows. The reduction of the red heifer to ash is as follows. I'm going to use two Hebrew words, chomer and surah. Chomer is the material, surah is the shape. Let me give you an example of that. What makes a bouquet of flowers beautiful and a dustbin ugly? Because in the dustbin, what stands out is the material, not its shape. Whereas in the bouquet of flowers, what stands out is its beautiful shape, not necessarily the material. In its essential form, each one of us has what we call a koyach hamisava, a power of desire. Now that can be used for either good or bad. We can have a taiva, a desire for spiritual holy things, or we can have a taiva and a desire for unholy things. Or somewhere in the middle, we can have it for something which is parav. So really, that power of desire is not necessarily good, bad, evil. It's a power within the soul. That is the chomer. That's the material. It's its essence. Beyond that, you have the tsura, the shape. The shape of the para aduma of the red heifer is that it's brought out as nourishment to chitzonim, meaning that this is where ugly desires are brought out for the material, for the den of iniquity, for the quagmire of sin. That is spiritual death. That's a verse we say when we take out the Sefer Torah, we place it on the bima before we read the Torah. What does it mean? Ve'atem, and you, hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem, who cleave to the Lord your God, chayim kolchem hayom, you are alive. Because life and death is defined in Judaism, not just as physical life and death, but when one is connected to eternity, to something which transcends time, space, the here and now, that is life. That's mitzvah, that's connection, that's godliness, that's holy. However, when a person invests in that which is temporal, in that which is fleeting, it's here 1 minute and gone the next. That is not living. It's not true life. The greatest defilement is when a person comes into contact with a corpse. A corpse is dead. It's lifeless. Just like we have physical death, we can also, God forbid, experience on various levels spiritual death. So when we make the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Mechaya HaMesim, blessed are you, Lord, who resurrects the dead every single day, 3 times when we say it in the Amidah, we're not only praying for the resurrection, which will take place after the Mashiach will come, but we're actually praying that those dead elements within ourselves, the areas where we are disconnected, the areas where we are spiritually numb, the areas where we feel distant, not in sync, they should be resurrected and reconnected. How do we do that? We burn the red heifer. So what we do is we reduce this red heifer into its base element, into ash. You know, there are 4 parts or 4 kingdoms. There's the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the human. And what we do is we take this red heifer and we completely reduce it to its base element of ash. The ash represents the formless power for desire. We extract our desires away from the redness of the heifer, of that powerful ox, which is very destructive, can be destructive, and we reduce it, that desire, and get it ready to be mixed with living water. In that fire, we place erez. Erez is the tallest of the trees, the cedar. Any arrogance needs to be burnt in that fire. The azov, the hyssop, is the most humble and smallest of all growths. You know, lack of self-esteem and sometimes misplaced self-esteem, saying, who am I and what am I and can I do it, can I not? That's also not good. And we take a crimson thread. The crimson thread is called toilas shoni. A toileah in Hebrew is a worm. King David says in Tehillim, Anochi soilas velo ish. I'm a worm, not a man. What does that mean? So the Talmud points out that just like a worm has only power in its mouth, what can eat through the cedar wood and disintegrate it? It's the power of the words of our tefillah, of our prayer. It's interesting that the word to bring a sacrifice is lehakriv, from the word karov, proximity, drawing near, because through the korban we draw near to God. But it's also the same letters as leharkiv, which means to disintegrate. Because in order to draw near, one needs to disintegrate, rather like the seed in the earth, which first disintegrates and then grows. So the first thing is the dynamic of rotzoi, the yearning, the burning up of that red heifer, taking all our indulgences, our misplaced passions, where we have indulged and we have passions in the areas of the unholy, to burn it up and to be reduced to that single unit of yearning, and then to mix it with water, which is mayim chayim, which comes from underneath the ground and is living waters. What is this mayim chayim? Our sages tell us, ein mayim ela Torah. Mayim, water, is a reference to Torah. What is the connection between Torah and water? Yes, water is life-sustaining. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya gives a beautiful, deep understanding over here. And he says that Torah is God's wisdom. And just like water, which cascaded down from a high place to a low place, and water finds the lowest level, so too God's wisdom cascades down from its supernal roots and it becomes applied in this world. And so consequently, when we have this tremendous yearning in tefillah, in our prayers, to be attached to God, and we disintegrate the redness of the heifer in order to get away from any impurity of death, spiritual death, then the next thing after the rotzoi, after that yearning, is the shuv, is the coming back in Torah learning and ultimately in mitzvah performance. As it says in the prophet, the thirsty one should go and drink water. The thirsty one here is the one who is thirsty to attach. God said, if you're thirsty to attach, learn Torah, because Torah is my wisdom. And if your mind will become one with that wisdom, then you will be able to take that wisdom and apply it into the deed of mitzvah performance. And consequently, we have encapsulated in para aduma, in the red heifer, the entire Torah. Zois chukas HaTorah. The dynamic of every other mitzvah is one of toing and fromming. Hachayas rotzoi v'shoiv. There is this yearning and then this returning. What is fascinating about this is that the yearning starts off on one level with, on a spiritual level, an egocentric desire. Some people want things for selfish reasons. But there's a fascinating concept of selfishness in the spiritual realm. that a person can want revelation, attachment for some, albeit very refined, selfish reason. And the true level of service is when a person dissolves, and what happens is they return to this world to grow, not out of any selfish desires, but out of a complete bittul, self-nullification to the divine will. This is expressed in Torah learning. When we learn Torah, when we mouth the words of Torah, it says, Ta'an l'shoni imrasecha. Let my tongue repeat over or say over your words. In other words, when we're learning Torah, we're actually just saying over the divine wisdom and will. It's becoming a conduit for the divine. And only when Torah is learned on that level, which is the level of bittul, do you have the correct return to this world. Because when a person attaches and wants to cleave to God, God says to the person, great to see you, lovely to have you here. Now go back down there, and there in that world, in the world of commerce, in the world of relationships, in the world of challenge, that's where I want you to be holy. That's where I want you to be attached. That's where I want you to make a dwelling for the divine there. And if you do that, not because of any selfish interest, because that's the fulfillment of the divine, what you have done is burned the red heifer into its ash, mixed that with living waters of Torah, and purified spiritual death. The word the Torah uses is chukas. The word chukah comes from the word chakika. Chakika means engraved. What is the difference between words that are engraved and words that are written? It's fascinating that the Torah which we have comes in two parts. The Torah shebichsav, the written law, and the Torah shebal peh, the oral law. The written law was written with ink on parchment. God dictated the written law to Moshe. The oral law was said by word of mouth, and Moshe gave that over by word of mouth to future generations. It was only in the times of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, because of the danger of it becoming forgotten, that it was first written down in the form of the Mishnah and thereafter the Talmud and so on and so forth. But essentially, it's an oral tradition. But there's a higher level even than the written law. And those are the tablets of stone that were in the Holy of Holies in the Ark. That was not written ink on parchment. For ink is one item, and the parchment is the second item. And writing ink on parchment fuses the two. One may have this notion, and many Jews, you see, operate, at least externally, with such a notion that they exist and somehow they fit in the Torah to their existence. It's, if you want, ink on parchment. This week's parasha tells us, Zois chukas HaTorah, in order to experience Torah, it needs to be engraved. It needs to be part of your fabric. It needs to be your very essence, your core. And how do we access that core? That is through the Para Aduma experience. The Rotzoi, the daily yearning, the meditation, davening properly, having that tremendous yearning to cleave, and then the return, the shuv. The return into this world in the knowledge that we're here as a candle, we're here to illuminate, we're here to serve. Ani nivresi l'shamesh eskoini, I am here to serve my master. And when the return is infused with tremendous bittul, self-effacement, and all the ego and the haughtiness of the cedar is gone in the fire. And now all that runs in my veins is the living water of that Torah. Torah is compared to water. Mayim Chayim, living water, means Torah that stems from the deepest and most hidden source in creation. In Kabbalistic terminology, the level of Keser, the level of the crown, because Torah comes from Chochmah. However, living water comes from the level of Keser, of the crown. It's that which even transcends Chochmah, and that comes down, and that can purify even one who has come into contact with a corpse, with something which is not physically living. So let's wrap it all up, and let's make it contemporary, and let's give it a lesson to each one of us. Today, we've learned a beautiful insight, a tremendous, beautiful insight into the Para Aduma. What relevance does it have to us living in 2020? The answer is that we could, and sometimes we do, get lost in social mores, lost in peer pressure, lost in taiva, in desires, unholy desires. But we need to have the sharp focus that is a kiss of death. It's not there forever. It's here and it's gone. If we want to truly live in this world as well as the next, and not for selfish purposes, not for any rewards, as the Alter Rebbe himself was one to say, I'm not looking for your Garden of Eden, I'm not looking for your world to come, I just want you. That can be experienced every day, every morning when you wake up and you say, Modeh ani lefanecha. That you can carry with you every single day of your life, 24/7. And that is the living waters of the Para Aduma. Thank you very, very much.
Rabbi Tuvov, thank you. As always, so interesting and informative. Who knew Kabbalah could be so put down in such an understandable way? Thank you.
Pleasure.
Everyone joining in, thank you. We will be sending out information regarding Rabbi Dubov's next Zoom Shurim and his advanced course. So please keep your computers open. Please join us tomorrow night for a Zoom webinar with two great entrepreneurs. And with that, have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your week.